My name is Sarah, and from a young age, I learned a bitter lesson. In my family, love was never distributed equally. My older brother Daniel was always the golden child in my parents' eyes. He wasn't just praised on every occasion, he was given the best of everything our family had to offer. And me? I was the shadow in the background, the one they remembered only when chores needed doing or when they wanted to compare someone to Daniel to boost his praise even more. I still remember that Christmas when I was 7. Daniel tore open the biggest box under the tree and screamed with joy when he saw the newest gaming console. My parents beamed, and my mom even pulled out her phone to record this special moment. I sat quietly, waiting for my turn, trying not to get my hopes up too much. My gift? A gray t-shirt from a clearance rack, tag still on, $3.99, with the logo of some plumbing company on it. Too big, too ugly, and way too obvious that no one had bothered to choose it for me. My mom just smiled and said, "Sweetie, you should learn to be content. Daniel's older. He needs more important things." I forced a smile, then sat in the corner watching Daniel play his new game. The screen's glow lighting up his thrilled face, while I blinked back the sting in my eyes. Holidays never got better. For Daniel's 16th birthday, they threw a huge outdoor party. There was a live band, it was held at a lakeside park, and they gave him a brand new Ford with a big red bow on the hood. Practically the whole neighborhood showed up. For me, I got to invite 2 friends over for frozen pizza at home, sitting under the weak yellow light in the living room. My birthday gift? A cheap notebook and a ballpoint pen. Not even a cute one, just the kind people hand out for free at job fairs. "You're practical," my dad said. "You don't need anything fancy." But Daniel got all the fancy things, even though he never had to ask. When he went to college, my parents covered his full tuition and gave him monthly spending money. As for me, I got a stack of student loan applications and a long lecture about growing up and being independent. No one asked if I was okay, if I had enough to eat, or if I was exhausted from working late-night shifts. I used to believe that if I just worked harder, things would change, but by the time I graduated, that last bit of hope had shattered. Daniel was welcomed home with a big backyard celebration, confetti poppers, a 3-tiered cake, cheers from relatives. My parents gave him a starter home in the northern suburbs as a reward for all his hard work. Me. I walked into our small dining room, where only my parents sat, along with a takeout box of fast food. They handed me a plain white envelope. I hoped it might be a small check to help cover my remaining tuition debt, but inside was a $2 scratch-off lottery ticket. "Just for fun," my mom said cheerfully, like it was the cutest little joke. "Maybe you'll hit it big?" I looked up at them. Neither of them looked guilty or even awkward. My dad shrugged. "You know how it is. All our money went into Daniel's house." I smiled. A tired, hollow smile. I folded the ticket, tucked it into the pocket of my worn coat, and nodded. But inside, I wasn't angry. I was empty. Turns out, I was never part of the real plan in my family. And now, I was beginning to understand that if I wanted a place in this world, I'd have to make it myself, without expecting anyone to hand it to me. After that silent graduation dinner, I packed everything I owned, some old clothes, a beat-up laptop, and a chipped red suitcase, and left the house I'd never truly felt welcome in. I rented a tiny studio apartment in downtown Cincinnati, where car horns at midnight and the orange glow of streetlights replaced the cold silence of my parents' home. My apartment was barely big enough for a single bed, a small desk, and a noisy electric stove that buzzed every time I turned it on. The walls were stained off-white, the pipes leaked when it got cold, and arguments from the neighbors passed through paper-thin walls. But at least it was mine. No one belittled me. No one compared me to Daniel. No one told me I should be grateful for discount clothes during the holidays. I worked 2 jobs to survive. During the day, I was a marketing assistant at a small billboard company. At night, I worked at a bakery near the market, serving customers, wiping tables, and taking out the trash until nearly midnight. In those first weeks, I'd come home with aching feet, hands smelling like flour and fryer grease. But I felt lighter than I ever had back home. My family rarely texted, never called to ask how I was doing. In the family group chat, where I was still technically included, everything still revolved around Daniel. My mom would send photos of him posing with his new car or smiling in their newly remodeled living room for the third time. My dad sent videos of Daniel and his girlfriend vacationing in Florida with the caption, "The kid deserves it all." I was never part of those conversations. Even when I dropped in a simple check-in, "How's everyone doing?" the replies were just a few half-hearted emojis. Sometimes, I wondered if I disappeared. Would anyone even notice? The $2 lottery ticket my mom gave me on graduation night still sat in the drawer next to the kitchen, buried under a few coins, a dried-out pen, and an overdue electric bill. I never bothered to scratch it. To me, it was a bitter reminder that in my parents' eyes, that's all I was worth. A vague chance instead of a real investment. Every night I'd pass that drawer. Sometimes I'd run my fingers over the wrinkled edge of the ticket, then shut it again. I told myself I was used to being overlooked, that I didn't need anyone's approval. But sometimes, in those quietest hours, I'd still hear my mother's voice echoing in my mind. Daniel needs more. Like a splinter under my skin, I carried it with me even in sleep. Then one Friday evening, I was invited to a small party hosted by a coworker. While I sat quietly at the dessert table, a girl named Marissa from the creative team started chatting with me. After a while talking about work, she tilted her head, smiled, and asked, "Sarah, how come I never hear you talk about your family?" I hesitated, then just said, "Maybe because they never really saw me as part of it." Marissa didn't pry. She just nodded, like she understood more than anyone ever had. That feeling of being heard without being judged felt like a tiny crack opening somewhere deep inside. That night, when I got home, I opened the drawer. For the first time in months, I picked up the ticket and stared at the numbers under the thin silver coating. My heart slowed. I didn't know why, but something nudged me. Not because I wanted to be rich, but because I was tired of believing I had no worth. I laid the ticket on the table, grabbed my phone, and looked up how to check it on the state's lottery website. Just then, my phone buzzed with a new message from the family group chat. I opened it. It was a photo Daniel had just posted. He stood in front of a house, arm around his girlfriend, and behind them was a wooden sign that read, "Playground for our firstborn, coming soon." Underneath were messages from my parents. "So proud. Daniel's going to be a dad. Couldn't be happier." Not a single word from me. I gave a small laugh. But this time, it wasn't bitter. I set my phone down, uncapped the pen, and gently scratched off the silver layer. No matter what the outcome was, I was ready for change. I could barely breathe as the numbers revealed themselves. My heart pounded so hard I had to place a hand over my chest to make sure I was still conscious. I blinked, repeating each number under my breath, afraid I was reading them wrong. 8, 14, 27, 33, 42, 56. I looked at my phone screen, where the Ohio Lottery website flashed. "Congratulations! You've won the jackpot, $134 million. I dropped the pen and stared at the ticket like it had just burst into flame in front of me. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a dream. I had really won. The whole apartment seemed to hold its breath with me. I didn't scream. I didn't jump up and down like people do on TV. I just sat there, silent, hands trembling, mind spinning with a single question. Now what? I didn't call anyone. There wasn't a single person in my life I felt safe sharing this with. My family? They wouldn't ask how I felt. They'd only ask how much I planned to share. That same night, I sat down at my laptop and typed into the search bar, "What to do when you win the lottery." Hundreds of results came up, but I chose one from a well-known financial site. The first tip it emphasized: don't tell anyone. Find a trustworthy financial advisor. I wrote down a few of the top-rated names in the city. After a lot of thought, I chose someone named Carol Whitman, a financial expert with over 20 years of experience, whose office was on the 19th floor of a sleek glass building in downtown Cincinnati. I was so nervous before that first meeting, I almost didn't go. I wore my simplest dress, tied my hair back neatly, and arrived 15 minutes early. Carol's office smelled like peppermint tea and soft jazz music played in the background. She greeted me with a firm handshake, her bright brown eyes looking like they'd seen hundreds of stories just like mine before. "This isn't something that happens every day," Carol said after I told her everything in one breath. "But it's not magic either. We're going to turn this into a long-term opportunity, not a one-time stroke of luck." For 3 hours, she helped me create a detailed plan. I wouldn't claim the prize under my real name. We'd set up a limited liability company, an LLC, to receive the funds. That way, my identity would stay completely private. Carol called in a tax attorney, then an investment specialist. The team worked together like they were the only people in the world I could trust. Maybe they really were. After submitting all the paperwork and completing the process, I received my first check. $85 million after taxes, transferred into a new account under the company's name. I couldn't believe I was holding a number that used to exist only in my dreams. I once ate instant noodles for 3 straight months just to save money for the electric bill. Now, I could buy the entire building I lived in. But I didn't. I started with small steps. Paid off my student loans, cleared all my credit card balances, moved out of my old apartment and into a small, quiet house in the suburbs, where the maple trees turned a brilliant red every fall. No mansion, no sports car. I bought a gray hybrid Lexus, sleek, classy, but low profile. I kept my daytime marketing job, at least for the first few weeks. Not because I needed the money, but because I needed time to get used to this new version of myself, a Sarah who wasn't constantly backed into a corner. The only job I quit right away was the evening shift at the bakery. I wrote a handwritten thank you letter to the owner, along with a small check to help expand the cake display. It was the kindest goodbye I'd ever written. What surprised me most wasn't the feeling of freedom, it was the peace. Every morning I brewed coffee in a sunlit kitchen and looked out over the backyard where the sparrows chirped. I'd sit down, open a book, no longer worrying about payment deadlines or my mom's passive-aggressive calls. That lottery ticket now hangs in a small glass frame next to my desk, not as a brag, but as a reminder that sometimes the only thing we need is a chance, even if it comes from the most unexpected place. And that, for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone else to give me worth. I found it in my own hands. Life after that felt like a dream, but the kind you protect, quietly, like a secret you don't want to wake from. I officially left the marketing job after 3 months. On my last day, I brought 2 boxes of cinnamon waffles and a small bouquet of lavender to thank everyone. I told them I'd been offered a freelance opportunity at a creative agency in Seattle. No one questioned it. I had always worked hard, always dreamed bigger. A week later, I moved to Edgewood, a quiet suburb in southern Ohio. I bought a 2-story modern farmhouse with a wide backyard, an open kitchen with granite island and tall windows that welcomed the morning sun. A few neighbors joked I must have struck it big with unicorn stock. I just smiled faintly and said I freelance remotely for a foreign company. Vague enough that no one asked more. The car I picked was a pearl-white Tesla, smooth and silent, like my new life. I registered it under the company's name with a personalized plate that simply read, SK27. No one but me knew it stood for Sarah King, my name and my birth date. Every morning I brewed coffee with my new machine, stood on the balcony and looked at the tree-lined driveway, feeling light. I started writing, not for money, but because I wanted to. I wrote children's stories, something I'd dreamed of doing for years but was always told was impractical. Carol helped me invest in a small independent publishing house. On weekends, I attended watercolor classes at a nearby studio. It was the first time I'd truly lived freely. No rigid schedules, no comparisons. No, if Daniel could do it, why can't you? I stayed completely off social media. No photos, no updates. But rumors have a way of slipping through. It all started with Chloe, a college classmate who once shared a dorm with me. One afternoon, I got a message from her. "Sarah, did you just buy a house in Edgewood? I swear I saw your photo in the neighborhood group and freaked out." I nearly dropped my phone. In this neighborhood, residents often shared photos of new standouts. This time, it was my Tesla parked beside a mailbox labeled S. King with the caption, "What does our new neighbor do to be this rich? Free Starbucks to whoever guesses right." I rushed to remove my name from the mailbox and re-registered everything under the company. But it was too late. Chloe didn't say anything else, but a week later, I saw 3 missed calls from my mom. I didn't call back. 2 days later, I got a text from my cousin Lucas. "So you really moved to Edgewood? Everyone's talking. Your mom thinks you came into some money. They even asked if I knew anything." My heart sank. After years of being forgotten, it took just a photo of a car and a new house for them to suddenly remember I existed. I didn't reply to Lucas, but I knew the thing I'd feared most had finally happened. I couldn't stay hidden forever. Rumors spread like wind, and in my family, even a small breeze was enough to spark wild expectations. The next morning, while watering the plants, I saw a familiar black SUV slowly drive past and stop right in front of my gate. My heart thudded. The window rolled down and I saw Daniel, my brother, behind the wheel. Sitting next to him was my mom, hair perfectly curled, eyes full of curiosity she didn't bother to hide. I ducked behind a maple tree, my heart racing. They stared at my house for a while, then Daniel turned to Mom and said something. I couldn't hear it, but I could guess. It's probably her. The car drove off, but the dust from its tires lingered in my mind like a warning. That night, I sat in the living room, warm yellow light falling across the wooden floor, but I didn't feel comforted like usual. My phone buzzed. A message from Mom. "We need to talk. We'll come visit you soon." I locked the screen. No response. I had earned my freedom. But now, the question was, what would I do to protect it? My mom's texts kept coming all week, sometimes gentle. "Sweetheart, I just want to see you. I miss you." Sometimes casual. "We're making your favorite stew this Sunday. Want to join for dinner?" And sometimes sweet in that forced, sugary way. Family is forever, Sarah. No matter where you live or what you do, you'll always be part of us. I didn't reply to any of them. But I didn't block the number either. I wanted to see just how far they were willing to go. Finally, after 2 weeks of silence, Daniel called me directly. I stared at his name on the screen for a long moment, then picked up. "Sarah," he began, sounding overly cheerful. "Listen, Mom's really upset you've been avoiding us. Seriously, she cried all night yesterday." He paused, then shifted tone, like he was getting to the real reason. "So, me and Haley, we're getting married, did you hear? We're having the ceremony this coming spring. Mom and Dad are thrilled." I leaned back into the sofa, eyes fixed on the ceiling. "Yeah, I heard." I replied briefly. "So, why don't you come home for dinner this Sunday? The whole family'll be there. Just come for fun. We're still family, right?" I stayed silent for a moment, then agreed. Part of me wanted to know what they really wanted. Another part wanted to remind myself why I had walked away in the first place. Sunday night, I drove to the old house, the one I used to believe would one day love me back if I just tried hard enough. Same white picket fence, same stone walkway, same old swing still dangling under the porch. But I wasn't the girl who stood there waiting for praise anymore. Mom opened the door and hugged me just a little too tightly. "You're so skinny," she said, then walked straight to the kitchen without waiting for a reply. Dad gave a nod, like I was a guest. Daniel patted me hard on the back like we were long-lost friends reunited after vacation. Dinner went exactly how I expected. Conversation entirely about Daniel and Haley. Mom showed off the dress they'd picked. Dad talked about how they'd decorate the backyard for the wedding. I just sat there, smiled faintly, picked at my food, and counted the minutes until the performance ended. As dessert arrived, Mom tapped her spoon gently against her glass, the soft clink ringing out like a signal. "I have something to say," she began, eyes fixed on me. "Daniel and Haley are really excited for the wedding, but, putting together a proper ceremony and expanding the house so they can move in, it's going to cost quite a bit." I set my glass down. My hand was steady. I was ready. "And since you're doing so well," Mom continued, her voice sliding into sugar-coated sweetness, "the family thought, maybe, if you could help just a little, around $100,000 to build a new garage and help with some wedding expenses." Dad nodded, as if it had already been settled. Daniel leaned back in his chair, smiling expectantly. "Sarah," he said, "I know you get it. We're family, blood. Helping each other when it matters should be a given." I looked at them all, my eyes no longer holding any hope, just a quiet calm. The kind I had fought so hard to earn. "Family?" I repeated, my voice steady. "Where was family when I was in college, when I worked 2 jobs and lived off instant noodles for a month? Where were you then?" No one answered. "What was it Mom said to me back then?" I tilted my head and looked at her. "Oh, right. No one's stopping you from working harder." Well, now I have. I worked harder, but not to pay for the things you dismissed. No one smiled, no one argued. I stood up, picked up my purse, and looked at them one last time. "I used to hope you'd see me. I used to hope to be part of this family, but not anymore. And if you really want to expand your garage," I turned to Daniel and smiled, "then no one's stopping you from working harder." I walked out the door, feeling like an old, creaky door in my heart had quietly, firmly closed. And this time, I didn't look back. That night, I drove home in silence. No music, no podcast, just the soft hum of the tires against the road and the gentle wind slipping through the cracked window. In the rearview mirror, the glow of my old house blurred like a fading memory. But I knew I hadn't just left that place physically, I'd left it in spirit, too. When I got home, I sank onto the living room couch, slipped off my heels, and let out a long, deep breath. The relief didn't come all at once. Instead, there was a quiet sadness, like I had just said goodbye to something that once meant everything, even if it had hurt me so many times. But this time was different. I didn't cry. I didn't feel guilty. I just breathed. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't a child trying to earn love through good behavior. The next morning, my phone buzzed non-stop, messages from Mom. "What did you mean by that? I never treated you any differently. Family always comes first. You really hurt me, Sarah." Then from Daniel, "I don't even know who you are anymore. We just needed a little help and you acted like a stranger." I dropped the phone into a drawer and locked it. I'd heard these lines all my life. The only difference now was I didn't believe them anymore. I started my new days on my own terms. No rigid schedule, no urge to prove anything. Each morning I got up early, brewed coffee, and sat on the porch watching the sunlight spill across the front lawn. I wrote more, read more, even started learning to play the ukulele. Something I had dreamed of in high school but never got encouragement to pursue. I invested in a few small projects with Carol's guidance, my financial advisor who had become more like a close friend. We talked every week, not just about money but about life, balance, self-worth, and real freedom. My house grew warmer with time. I planted more lavender along the fence, added a small swing in the backyard, and built a tall bookshelf in the living room. Every item I chose, every corner I decorated, felt like a declaration. I was no longer living inside someone else's mold. One late fall afternoon, as I was watering the garden, I heard the doorbell ring. On the front step was a white envelope with no name. I opened it. Inside was an old family photo, me, Daniel, Mom, and Dad, taken on a summer trip to Lake Erie. On the back was one line: No matter where you are, home is still home. I didn't smile. I didn't feel sad. I just quietly folded the photo and placed it in the drawer next to the fireplace. I didn't rip it. Didn't throw it away. I just didn't belong there anymore. A week later, I received an invitation to an art exhibition in Columbus. One of my children's short stories had been illustrated and displayed in the new authors section. I drove there alone, with soft jazz playing in the car and a light buzz of excitement in my chest. No one clapped when I entered the gallery. No one took pictures of me next to the display. But I felt whole, more complete than I ever did standing beside Daniel, soaking up empty praise. After the exhibit, I sat alone in a small cafe down the street, jotting down new ideas in my leather notebook. A little girl at the next table watched me for a while, then walked over. "Are you the one who wrote Little Moon?" she asked, eyes bright. I nodded and smiled. "I really love that story. You're a great writer." That sentence, from a complete stranger, warmed my heart in a way I had waited my whole life to feel from the people closest to me. I thanked her and returned to my table, my chest filled with quiet joy. I had nothing left to prove, no one left to impress. I had stepped out of the invisible cage called family duty, and for the first time in my life I was living, truly living, with the clear belief that I was worthy of good things. Not because anyone said so, but because I had found that worth within myself, through the smallest things. The months that followed passed like a cool breeze on a sweltering summer day. My new life wasn't flashy or loud, but it was full of things I never dared to dream of when I lived under that old roof. I invested in a few edtech startups Carol introduced me to, bought a small cabin in Vermont for long retreats, and, every so often, I treated myself to a trip, not to escape but to explore. I had mornings sipping coffee by the beach in Santa Barbara, afternoons reading beneath old oak trees in Oregon, and evenings watching fireworks from a vintage hotel balcony in Savannah. No more financial stress, no more tightrope walking around icy glances or passive digs. With each passing day, I felt closer to the woman I had always hidden deep inside. I began writing more regularly. Children's stories, filled with imagination, small but brave characters, dreams dismissed by others but never truly extinguished. My debut book was published by a small press in Chicago, and strangely, I felt no urge to show it off to anyone in my family. For the first time, success wasn't tied to outside approval. I stopped checking messages from Mom or Daniel. Carol helped me move all personal contact to private channels. The people who really cared about me were already in my life. New friends, a few sincere professional relationships, and most importantly, one Saturday afternoon, as I waited for my order at my favorite organic bakery downtown, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Sarah?" I turned. It was Daniel. He wore a gray plaid shirt, his hair a little messy, like he had just stepped out of the car. He didn't look much different from the last time we met, except now his eyes had lost their old confidence. Instead, they carried a trace of weariness, a hint of bitterness. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said with a weak smile. "You live around here?" I nodded, polite but distant. "Yeah, close by. You?" Daniel shrugged. "Just picking up pastries for Haley. She's pregnant with our second." He paused. "Mom still talks about you all the time." I said nothing. Silence stretched for a few seconds. Then Daniel looked at me directly, voice quieter. "You know, sometimes I think this world just isn't fair." I tilted my head, my gaze calm, and replied clearly, "I agree. Life isn't fair. But I learned how to make it fair for myself." Daniel curled his lips like he wanted to say something but stayed quiet. Maybe he understood that I wasn't the same little sister who once sat quietly at the dinner table, smiling through pain. I didn't need them to know I was worthy. His silence said it all. He knew I had outgrown the box they tried to keep me in. A bakery employee called my name and handed me the warm bag. I nodded in thanks, turned to Daniel. I really do wish you the best. I mean that. I walked away without looking back. Under the soft golden sun stretching across the sidewalk, I moved slowly, steadily. I didn't need to win. I just needed to live. That night, I sat on my porch, a mug of chamomile tea in hand, eyes lifted to a sky sprinkled with stars. The wind rustled the lavender by the fence. I thought of the years that had passed, all the times I was forgotten, compared, made to feel like the extra piece. I once believed I was just a flawed version of something better, something Daniel represented, but now I knew the truth. I wasn't a copy of anyone. I was Sarah, someone who had been overlooked, dismissed, but also someone who rose and rebuilt a life from the pieces. Is life unfair? Maybe. But I made it fair, with my own hands and my own belief. And the freedom I have now, no one can take that away. From a girl underestimated by her own family, Sarah had moved beyond old wounds to build a life of freedom and value with her own two hands. She no longer sought validation from those who once hurt her, but instead learned to love herself and live in alignment with what she believed in. Sarah's story reminds us, no one has the right to define your worth, except you. Sometimes, walking away from toxic relationships is the very first step toward finding true happiness. What do you think of Sarah's journey? Have you ever experienced something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow our channel for more powerful and inspiring stories about family and self-worth. The birthday party was held in my sister's backyard, a modern farmhouse on the outskirts of Austin, strung with twinkling lights through every tree branch and a long table draped in white lace, decorated like something out of a wedding magazine. My twin nieces, Harper and Lily, had just turned 8. They wore identical, shimmery pink sequin dresses, their hair in fishtail braids with bows as big as their hands. The place was packed, full of familiar faces I hadn't seen in ages. Mostly for good reason. I held my daughter Ellie's hand as we stepped into that crowded garden. She had just turned 7 and had picked out a sparkly blue headband that morning because she said it looked like a smiling star. Ellie was shy, never fully at ease in crowds, and I felt her little shoulders tense as we walked in. But she had practiced saying happy birthday all the way there, and had even made 2 handmade cards with drawings of suns and rainbows. I told myself, just having the courage to show up was already a victory. I spotted my sister Abigail in the center of it all, laughing loudly, a glass of champagne sparkling in her hand. When our eyes met, she gave a slight nod before turning away, like I was a late-arriving housekeeper. My mom gave me that tight-lipped smile she always used to say, "Don't make a scene." My dad didn't even look up from his plate of sandwiches, as if the cold cut in his hand was the most important thing in the world. The gift bag handout happened right after the candle blowing. Each child was called up to receive a glittery fabric tote bag, their names written in sparkly cursive. I caught glimpses of the gifts inside: mini stuffed animals, handmade bracelets, imported lollipops, personalized water bottles with their initials. The delighted squeals sounded like a second Christmas. Then came Ellie's turn. An adult, probably one of my sister's friends, handed her a small, crumpled white paper bag. No decorations, just a crooked yellow sticky note on the front, scribbled in black marker. "Try harder next time." I saw Ellie pause. She looked at the bag like she was trying to misread it, like it had to be a joke, but no friendly laughter followed. She opened the bag slowly, as if still hoping there was something kind inside. A broken pencil, a discolored mint, and a dirty gray eraser. Nothing else. No note, no explanation. She turned to me, her eyes were shining, her hand squeezing mine. I knew that feeling, that gut-level confusion, that sense of having done something wrong without knowing what. I heard Abigail burst out laughing, that sharp-edged laugh she used when she thought she was being funny. "She's been a little extra lately," she said, like telling a joke. Crying, interrupting, too sensitive about little things. This was just a gentle reminder. My mom chuckled along. "Honestly, it's good for her, Nancy. You baby her too much." My dad grunted, like it was all just a dumb play he was being forced to sit through. I looked down at Ellie. She was trying to smile, that twisted kind of smile kids use when they're trying to hold in tears. No one else in that crowd seemed to notice. Or worse, they noticed and still chose to laugh. Jason, my husband, was standing beside me. He didn't say a word, just gently took the bag from Ellie's hands and said, voice low but steady, "Let's go get you a real treat." We took Ellie's hands and walked out of that party, quietly but with purpose, like people leaving a house that was already smoldering. No one stopped us, no one called out, not even Abigail bothered to turn her head. And I understood. This wasn't a party anymore. This was a warning, and a final line. On the drive home, Ellie sat silently in the back seat, hugging the torn white bag like she was still trying to figure out what had just happened. I caught Jason's eyes in the rearview mirror, calm but stormy. No one spoke. Even the car radio had been turned off at some point, leaving space for a strange kind of silence. Not uncomfortable, just like the three of us were all holding our breath, waiting for something to break. When we got home, Ellie didn't run to her room like she usually did. She placed the gift bag on the table, pulled off the sparkly headband, and climbed onto the couch, curling up under the thin Thanksgiving throw Jason had given her last year. She was still holding the 2 crayon-colored cards. The stars she'd drawn looked smudged now, like they were melting into each other. "Was it because I forgot to say thank you?" Ellie asked, her voice barely a breath, eyes still on the card. I felt my heart tighten. I sat beside her, gently touching her hand. "No, Ellie, it wasn't your fault. It wasn't because you forgot anything." I paused to make sure my voice was clear, firm. "Some people forget how to be kind, and that has nothing to do with you." She nodded. "Barely." Then she pulled the card to her chest like it was a paper shield. "But if I had drawn it better, maybe they would have liked it more. I wanted to say something strong, something that would make it all better, that love isn't something you should have to earn." But I couldn't find the words that felt right. I just pulled her into my arms and held her tight, as if I could block out every careless word that had ever been thrown at her heart. When Ellie drifted off to sleep in my arms, Jason came in with 2 mugs of hot tea. He sat across from me, thoughtful. "This," he said, "wasn't about a paper bag." I nodded. "I know." "How many times has it been now?" he asked, not needing an answer. "The time you brought pie to Thanksgiving and your mom said it was too salty, the time your sister said Ellie dressed weird, the time your dad told her to toughen up instead of crying at loud noises." I sighed. I used to hope they'd change. For Ellie. I thought, if I was patient enough, kind enough, one day they'd see her for who she really is. Jason set his mug down. "But they don't. They don't want to. Because if they see Ellie, they'd have to admit they were wrong about how they treated you." I looked back at my daughter, sleeping soundly, still holding her card like it was a dream she didn't want to let go. "I can't let this happen again." Jason said nothing, but I saw him nod, not in permission, but in silent agreement, like a vow. I stood up and walked to the drawer in my home office, the one where I kept temporary things I once thought I'd deal with someday. The utility bills I'd paid for my parents when they forgot, the texts from my sister asking me to watch the twins so she could take a week off from the stress. The promise to pay me back for the roof repairs after the storm, that still hung in the air. I had printed it all out, neatly organized in a nameless folder. Quietly, I opened the lid, pulled out a blank page and a marker. I wrote, slowly, deliberately. Not to threaten or punish, but to record the truth. In the top right corner, I taped the wrinkled yellow sticky note, the one from Ellie's gift bag. The words, "Try harder next time," still visible, still tilted like a smirk. Jason walked in and saw me placing it on the first page of the folder. He said nothing. Then he rested a hand on my shoulder. "This time, we're not going back, okay?" I squeezed his hand. "No more times." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat beside Ellie's bed listening to her steady breaths. In the dark, I thought of all the times I'd stayed quiet. All the times I was told I was too sensitive, too demanding, overreacting. And I swallowed it, afraid of making things worse. But this wasn't about me anymore. This was about Ellie. And Ellie deserved a different beginning. Tomorrow, I'd start clearing things out, both the house and my heart. But tonight, I just sat there, keeping watch over her peaceful sleep, and whispered a promise. No one will hurt her again, not as long as I still have breath in my chest. I grew up in a 4-bedroom house with 3 witnesses to the fact that I was always the one left out. My sister, Abigail, was the kind of child parents build their hopes on and repeat like a tired refrain. Straight A student, hair always neat, knew how to talk to adults, and never made a fuss. Every word, every move she made was met with warm smiles and gentle pats on the back. And me, the child who asked too many whys, got distracted easily, and never quite learned how to please a crowd, was often left out of the frame. I remember back in 3rd grade when my teacher chose me as the inspiration of the month for helping a classmate learn to read. I ran home with the certificate, still smelling of fresh ink. My mom picked it up, glanced at it, and said, "Your sister was chosen 3 months in a row, but congratulations." Then she turned back to finish her favorite TV drama. There was no cake, no text in the family group chat like the ones that always showed up whenever Abigail won a school debate competition. When I started drawing, though I wasn't very good, I really loved it, my dad said, "You should do something more practical, like your sister studying finance. Art doesn't put food on the table." My sketches slowly ended up in my desk drawer, collecting dust, and eventually, even I forgot about them. I used to think I was just too sensitive. I blamed myself for feeling left out, for feeling compared. I tried to do everything right, kept my room clean, finished homework before dinner, never needed to be asked twice. But it was never enough. I was still the one stuck in the front seat whenever we went on family trips, because the better seats were for Abigail. She gets carsick easily. I was still the one who had to give up my favorite food because your sister really enjoys that dish. My feelings were never seen as valid. When I cried after my best friend turned her back on me, my mom said, "What did you do to upset her? Don't overcomplicate things." When I said I felt sad for no reason, she sighed, "Kids these days always think something's wrong just to get attention. No one ever asked why I was sad. They just wanted me to stop so they wouldn't be bothered." I grew up believing that love was something to be earned, that I was only worth caring about when I wasn't a burden, when I did everything right. And if I ever felt hurt, it was my fault for being too sensitive. It wasn't until college, when I finally got out of that thick atmosphere, that I realized not all families are like that. I met Jason my senior year. He was the first person who really listened without interrupting or brushing me off with empty advice. The first time I cried because I missed home, even though I couldn't think of a single thing I missed, he simply rested his hand on my back, saying nothing. He didn't need to. The first time Jason met my family, he stayed quiet through the entire dinner. Then, once we got in the car, he said, "I get it." I didn't have to explain. The way my mom asked all about Abigail's work but forgot to ask what I did. The way my dad bragged to Jason about his successful daughter without ever looking in my direction. He saw everything. And then Ellie came along. Her arrival made me believe I could change things. I wanted her to have what I never did. A full family, holiday gatherings, memories with grandparents, aunts and uncles. I forgave my mom, my dad, Abigail, or at least tried to set aside the hurt so Ellie wouldn't miss out. I ignored the sarcastic comments about my parenting, her outfit choices, the way she didn't like being hugged. I brushed off the times Ellie looked at me with wide eyes and asked, "Mom, why does Grandma shake her head like that when I talk?" I kept telling myself, if I'm patient enough, kind enough, they'll come to accept Ellie, love her, change. Until that day. The gift bag with the yellow note. Ellie's strange smile. Abigail's gleeful laugh, and I realized I was wrong. The pattern didn't start with Ellie. It started with me. And if I did nothing, it wouldn't stop with her. That wasn't just a party. It was a perfect reenactment of what I'd lived through. Only this time, it pierced right through my daughter's heart. I started noticing something wasn't right when Ellie was 4. It began with what seemed like harmless remarks, like when she wore a purple star-print dress to a classmate's birthday. Not the kind of dress a little girl should wear, my mom said flatly when she saw the photo I posted. Abigail texted with a smirking emoji, "Let's hope she doesn't think fashion is her thing." I laughed it off, typed, "Kids have their own style," and scrolled past it, telling myself I was overreacting. But the small comments started to pile up. I remember once when Ellie didn't want to hug her grandpa during a holiday visit, she pulled her hand back, hiding behind me, quietly saying, "I don't want to be touched." My mom frowned and said loudly in front of everyone, "Kids these days are so rude. Who's going to love her acting like that?" Abigail burst out laughing. "Guess she takes after her mom, so emotional and loves controlling people." I spoke up gently, explained that Ellie had sensitivity to physical touch and needed her boundaries respected. My parents just looked confused and irritated. "You're teaching her to reject basic manners," my dad said, with a tone like it was absolute truth. I tried to explain how Ellie reacts to loud sounds, how she needs time to adjust to new people, that this was part of how she experiences the world. But no one listened. Every time I set a boundary to protect her, I got labeled again. Overprotective, snowplow mom, too intense. One Christmas gathering, Abigail put a loud toy right in front of Ellie, one I'd specifically asked not to bring. Ellie startled, covered her ears, and burst into tears. Instead of apologizing, Abigail stared at me and shrugged. "This is called real-world training. Life doesn't come with a volume control." I held Ellie close, feeling her whole body shake. As I carried her out of the living room, I heard my mother whisper behind me, "She always overreacts to everything." I don't remember how many times I've left that house with Ellie in my arms and my chest tight. But I remember the familiar feeling, just like when I was called complicated, too emotional, uncontrollable. Only now, it was my daughter. I used to think I was strong enough to endure it, wise enough to separate past from present. But I was wrong. The way they treated me is now being replayed with Ellie. Different name, same script. And like me back then, Ellie has started to learn how to shrink herself, stay quiet, wait for the right moment to speak. One afternoon when Ellie was 6, she brought home a watercolor painting, soft spirals and purples and blues blending together. I asked, "What did you paint?" She said, "I painted my feelings because I don't know how to say them." I froze. I saw myself in that answer, a child who once had to draw emotions because no one gave her permission to speak them. That night, I called Abigail. I tried to stay calm, explained that the teasing was affecting Ellie, that she needed to be treated with respect. The reply I got was a dry laugh. "Auntie, are you serious? If kids can't handle a few comments, how are they going to survive life? Stop projecting your feelings onto your daughter." I hung up. Jason was next to me, eyes still on his laptop, but his voice low and steady. "How many times have they told you you're imagining the problem?" I didn't answer. I was thinking of Ellie. What kind of person she'd become if I kept letting her be pulled into this cycle. I knew the question would come. Is it worth cutting ties? Keeping your child away from her grandparents, her relatives? I used to be afraid that if I did, Ellie would lose part of her family. But now, I see more clearly than ever. Family isn't the people who make her shrink herself to fit their expectations. Family is where she can be herself, without fear of being laughed at or corrected. And if I have to choose between keeping the peace in a toxic family or protecting the wholeness of my daughter's spirit, I won't hesitate. The morning after the birthday party, I got up earlier than usual, even though I hadn't slept much at all. The first light crept through the window, streaking across the wooden floor, soft and quiet, as if to remind me today would be different, not because of what was coming, but because of what I was ending. Jason sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, his eyes still foggy, but when I set the thick brown folder on the table, he glanced at it and nodded like he'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. "Where do we start?" he asked. I opened the folder, flipping through the pages. Each one was a memory I had once dismissed, tried to forget, or told myself wasn't a big deal. There were screenshots of texts from Abigail asking if I could help pay for her car repairs because my paychecks messed up this month. A quick thank you followed, no repayment. An email from my mom last year about their utilities being shut off because of a billing error and asking me to cover, actually the fourth time in 2 years. Even a bill with my name on the internet service at my parents' house, even though I moved out when I was still single. I'd even printed excerpts from old journal entries about family gatherings where Ellie was mocked, where I was scolded just for not toughening her up. I organized them into sections: finances, hurtful words, emotional neglect, repeating patterns of harm. Then I clipped each one, labeled them clearly. Finally, I stuck a yellow sticky note on the cover. No long explanation, just 3 words. "That's enough." Jason printed 3 copies. One stayed with us, one would go to Abigail. The last I planned to send to Aunt Margaret, the only relative who ever opened her heart to me. She once told me, "Some silences are a kind of complicity." I knew she'd understand. That afternoon, I drove to Abigail's neighborhood, a quiet little suburb in Fort Worth, where she moved after I helped cover most of the down payment. I once thought helping her would keep our fragile connection alive. Now I knew I'd only prolonged a wound that never healed. I didn't ring the bell. I simply placed the envelope squarely at her doorstep, then stepped back a few paces. Jason waited in the car. I looked at the house one last time. The porch full of potted plants I once gave her, the SUV I helped put a deposit on sitting in the garage, and saw it all for what it was, a worn-out stage play I'd finally learned how to walk off of. That evening, when I checked my phone, there were 17 missed calls from Abigail. I didn't answer a single one. There was a message from my mom. "What are you doing? Are you trying to ruin everything?" I didn't respond. I just opened my email, attached the scanned PDF of the file, and sent it to every relative in my contact list, all the ones who ever asked why I stopped coming to family events. The subject line was simple: "In case you ever wondered why I stopped showing up." The next morning, I got a reply from Uncle Lewis in Kansas. "This is complicated, but you are very brave. I hope Ellie grows up in a fairer world." A cousin in Oregon sent one line: "Proud of you." I wasn't hoping anyone would pick sides. I just needed the truth to be seen. Jason closed every financial support account we'd quietly been covering for my family over the years: phone bills, insurance payments, college help for Abigail's eldest daughter she once asked us to cover for a few months. All of it ended in one afternoon. No explanations, no apologies. 3 days later, there was a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole. It was my mother. Her eyes were red, but her gaze still held that same look that always made me feel 10 years old again, part pleading, part blaming. I didn't open the door. Jason stood beside me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. He didn't need to say anything. My mother left a piece of paper in the mailbox. I opened it. It was a card that read, "Thinking of you," on the front. Inside, in her handwriting, "Family is where we forgive each other. Don't let little things destroy blood ties." I quietly took the yellow sticky note from the folder I had prepped the day before and wrote a new line below the words, "That's enough." It's not a little thing when it happens for years. I stuck it onto the card and placed it back in the mailbox to return. That night, for the first time in years, I slept soundly. No dreams, no second guessing, just quiet. And in that quiet, I finally heard something I'd never been allowed to hear as a child. The sound of my own voice, clear and unwavering. Not even 24 hours after I sent the file to the whole family, my phone started buzzing non-stop like a chaotic symphony. The first message was from Abigail. No greeting, just all caps. "What do you think you're doing?" Then came a string of long texts, mixing guilt-tripping denial and subtle threats. "It was just a joke. Why are you trying to make me the villain? You just destroyed this family over one silly gift bag. If you don't stop, I'll get a lawyer." Then came messages from my parents. My dad's was brief, just one line. "That's enough, Nancy." My mom's was longer, more emotional, but missing the one thing I'd been waiting for my entire life: an apology. She sent an email, along with a handwritten letter through the mail, with the subject line, "Let the past rest." I opened the envelope while Ellie was napping on the sofa, curled under a knit blanket, holding her favorite teddy bear. Jason was working in the backyard, and for a moment, the house was so quiet it felt like it was holding its breath with me. My mother's letter was written on cream-colored stationery with floral borders, her handwriting still neat and precise, just like when she used to correct my homework in first grade. But the content was all too familiar. An old tune with slightly new lyrics. "Family is never perfect, but it's the only place to turn when everything else falls apart. You're cutting off the most valuable bond you'll ever have. You can't keep holding on to petty grudges from the past. Think of Ellie. She needs her grandparents, her aunts and uncles, her cousins." The final line closed with a warning disguised as love. "If you don't come back, someday Ellie will blame you for taking her family away." I don't know what I expected when I opened that letter. Maybe an acknowledgement, a brief moment of honesty, a touch of conscience. But all I got was the same echo I'd heard for years, where every wrongdoing was covered in sugar and labeled family. I sat down, pulled a blank sheet of paper and a black marker from the drawer. No long speech. I simply wrote, "I used to miss my family too." I folded it, placed it in the old envelope, and mailed it back. No signature, no explanation. A few days later, I found out Abigail had written a long Facebook post, complaining about a family member who, out of pride, aired private matters online to ruin someone's reputation. The comments were flooded with support, mostly from her close friends. Some even tagged me, saying things like, "You don't choose your family, but you can learn to forgive. Sisters shouldn't turn against each other over a little misunderstanding." I said nothing, but a few hours later, a cousin from Minnesota, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, messaged me privately. "If what you wrote in that file is true, she owes you more than just an apology." I don't know how far this will spread, but I do know one thing for sure. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel wrong for standing up for myself. One late weekend afternoon, while I was arranging flowers in the kitchen, Ellie ran in from the backyard. Hands muddy, hair messy, eyes shining. She shouted, "Me and Zoe built a whole tent out of towels. Wanna see?" I nodded and smiled, setting the scissors down. "I always want to see what you create." As we walked into the yard, I remembered something my mother once told me after I got a low grade in math as a kid. "Don't let people see where you're weak. They'll use it against you." But now, I've learned something else. When you know where you're vulnerable, you know how to protect yourself. And more importantly, I'm teaching that to Ellie. Every day, with the unconditional love I never received. As summer gave way to the early winds of fall, Ellie began to change in a way I couldn't quite name, but felt deeply. She laughed more, not the kind of laugh that seeks approval, but light, unburdened laughs, like she could finally breathe in a space that belonged to her. She made 2 new friends in her Tuesday afternoon art class, Lena and Joy, 2 girls from the neighborhood who also loved finger painting and traded friendship bracelets every week. I stood quietly at a distance, watching as Joy tied a green yarn bracelet onto Ellie's wrist. Her eyes lit up like she'd just won a medal. No one there told her she was too sensitive or needed to toughen up, and I knew she was growing up in a safer world than the one I knew. We hung paper lanterns all around Ellie's room, warm, soft light that replaced the old nightlight my mother once said would make a child's nerves weak. I let Ellie pick out new bedding, pastel swirls like watercolor, because she said it looked like the sky after it rains. I bought a new bookshelf for the living room, and for the first time in years, I placed a photo of the three of us, me, Jason, and Ellie, right in the center. No more pictures of my parents or Abigail, not out of anger, but because I had let go. At night, Ellie and I read books together. Some nights, she reads to me stumbling but full of confidence. Some nights, she asked me hard questions. Mom, have you ever been scared? Why don't adults say sorry when they're wrong? I didn't dodge anymore. I told her the truth, even if it was just a nod and a quiet yes. I used to be scared, but not anymore. One Saturday afternoon, while I was wiping down the kitchen counter, my phone rang. The screen showed Abigail. I wasn't planning to answer, but then a text popped up right after. 6 words, shorter and colder than any long speech. Are you happy now? You won. I read the message 3 times. Not because I didn't understand, but because I was checking if I felt anything. Did it hurt? Was I angry? Was I satisfied? I felt nothing at all. Because I didn't win. This was never a competition. There was no winner, no loser, there was just me. A mother who finally did what I once wished someone had done for me as a child. Step in, protect, and not look back. I locked the screen. Didn't reply. That evening, Ellie skipped into the kitchen holding a new drawing. She had painted a small house, surrounded by a rainbow garden with 3 stick figures holding hands in front. A long-hand one, a bearded one, and a smiling child. On the roof, she'd written, "Where I get to be myself." I pinned it on the fridge, right next to the weekly meal plan and scribbled work notes. It was an ordinary moment, but to me, it was a miracle. A few weeks later, Ellie was invited to speak at her school's family day, where each student picked one loved one to sit beside them while they read something they'd written. She chose me. Her piece was only 3 sentences long. Home is where I'm trusted and loved. My mom is my home, and that's where I feel safe. I tried not to cry, but the tears still came, not from pain, but from relief. That night, when Jason took us out for ice cream, Ellie asked, "Mom, if Aunt Abigail texts you again, will you be mad?" I smiled, gently brushing her hair. "No, I won't be mad, but I don't need to reply either. Because sometimes the strongest thing we can do is stay silent and keep living well." Ellie nodded, then whispered, "I want to live well too. Just like you." I turned to Jason and caught his quiet smile. The kind of smile from someone who knows, deep down, that we did the right thing. In the soft calm of the car driving through the night, I realized I didn't need anyone's approval. I didn't need someone to say, "Nancy was right." Because I already had the clearest proof. A child growing up with trust, safety, and unconditional love. That night, after Ellie had fallen asleep, I sat alone in my home office. The soft yellow light from my desk lamp cast a glow on old sticky notes, calendar pages marked with red circles, therapy appointments, parent-teacher meetings, the day of that unforgettable birthday party. Everything was behind us now. Life for me and Ellie had become peaceful, measured in small moments. Her laughter in the kitchen while baking cookies, the soft gurgle of water from the little fish tank Jason had just set up, the warm shimmer of paper lanterns each night. But in the quietest moments like this one, something still crept in. A question, like a silent shadow. Did I do the right thing? I won't deny that cutting ties with my own family was the hardest thing I've ever done. There were nights I lay awake, not out of regret, but out of ache. I wondered, if I had explained more, if I had cried in front of them, if I had pleaded, would they have changed? Should I have reacted more strongly at the party? Called it out in front of everyone? Protected Ellie with a bold public stand? Or was walking away in silence the strongest thing I could have done? I chose not to speak. Not because I was weak, but because I'd been through enough endless arguments. I didn't need to win a small fight when what I wanted was a lifetime of peace for my daughter. Sometimes I think about my mother, about the things she never said, about how she told me, "Don't make things messy," instead of asking, "Are you okay?" I think about my father, always silent, never stepping in, even when his eyes flickered during Abigail's jabs at dinner. He knew, but he chose silence. I don't want Ellie to grow up in a world like that, a world where silence is mistaken for peace and expressing emotions is seen as too much. I once read somewhere, some families aren't meant to be preserved, they're meant to be let go. And when I see Ellie, painting without trembling, making friends without looking down, smiling without checking for approval, I know I wasn't wrong, but that doesn't mean it's been easy. There are still moments of doubt. I still wake from dreams of family dinners where Abigail doesn't mock me, my mother genuinely asks how I am, and my father holds my hand and says, "I'm sorry." Dreams so vivid that for a few seconds after waking, I forget they never happened, and maybe never will. I look out the window, the shadows of trees swaying beneath the soft streetlight. I think of all the mothers out there, holding the same question I've held. Am I doing the right thing by saying, enough? By stepping out of the cycle of excuses labeled family? I don't have a perfect answer, I can't choose for you, but I can say this. I was once a child who was overlooked, shaped by other people's expectations, forced to be sweet, quiet, tolerant, and I carried that through my whole childhood. I can't change my past, but I can change Ellie's future. So, if you're reading this, if you've lived something similar, if you're standing at the edge between family tradition and the emotional safety of yourself or your child, I want to ask, if it were your child, would you do what I did? Would you stay out of fear of being labeled ungrateful? Or would you walk away to plant a new generation that never had to learn how to endure? Would you choose silence, or would you break the cycle? With a scream, a letter, or simply one step away without looking back? I don't have the perfect answer, but I have Ellie. A child growing up without having to hide her tears, without fear of being called too much, without needing to earn love. And for me, that's enough to know I'm on the right path. What about you? My story isn't just about a party, a gift bag, or a few hurtful words. It's about the courageous journey to end a generational cycle of silence and pain. I chose to walk away from blood ties that no longer nurtured us, to build a home that was truly safe for my daughter. Maybe I didn't win in other people's eyes, but I chose what was right for my heart. Because happiness doesn't come from keeping the whole family together. It comes from protecting what truly matters. The peace of your child. What do you think about my choice in this story? If it were you, what would you do to protect your child? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow the channel for more real, heartfelt stories about family.